All right, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to our panel. So this is a panel on AI and education equity, and we're going to be sharing perspectives on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and social justice as it relates to AI and educational technology. And we have 6 amazing speakers. So we have Dr. Benjamin G, Kenya Andrews, Dr. Lili, Jaemarie Solyst, Dr. Francisco Castro, and hopefully Dr. Tiara Tanksley will be joining us soon. So we'll look forward to hearing from them. And this is actually the first one of a series of conversations that we're going to be having on this topic, accompanying a special issue that we're organizing for the Journal of Computing and Higher Education on AI and education equity in higher education. So if you do work in this space, or if you're interested in this space, stay tuned for our future conversations and look for the call for the special issue of the journal. So I'm going to kick us off. So the format for today is we're going to have short 5-minute talks from each of our panelists, and then we'll do moderator questions. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, and feel free to post your questions as we go, and I'll be watching either the Zoom chat or the Whova chat for them. And so without further ado, our first speaker is Dr. Benjamin G.
Thank you very much, Erin. Hi, I'm Benji Shea. I'm an embedded ethics postdoctoral fellow at Stanford's Institute for Human-Centered AI and Ethics Center, where I think about how data and data-driven tools like AI lack context that reflect historical biases. So therefore, if we think that AI might serve educational equity goals, we need to figure out how to connect data and AI with historical and social context. So my research thinks about how do we design these critical and equitable human data interactions that build capacity for teachers, students, or community advocates to connect their interpretations of data and AI outputs with their own domain expertise. So that has me working with Stanford CS professors to embed ethics into undergrad CS courses, as well as exploring how reflective and self-regulation skills can support students in using generative AI tools. I'm going to keep the intros really brief because I really want to hear your questions, but I will say in terms of like my perspectives on emerging tech and AI are really informed by the many different disciplines that I kind of wander through. So for example, from the field of psychometrics, I think a lot about validity, or the situated notion of validity. So we think about validity, I don't think about it as like whether AI is valid or data is valid, but thinking about validity as evidence and support of using, in this case, AI tools for a specific purpose by a specific stakeholder. So when is a valid AI use, for what and for whom? I'm also engaged with human-computer interaction, so I think about long-term mutual partnerships. So this is from a design justice tradition. So the idea that, like, again, if we want to try to avoid education, if we want to try to support educational equity, we need to figure out how do we make long-term mutually beneficial partnerships with people with kind of different cultural and institutional norms, and also different expertise. I also read a lot about critical scholarship, because if we have any hope of advancing using AI to advance educational equity, we have to think about these structures of power. So in particular, for example, like Patricia Hill Collins' Matrix of Domination. So I think about like if we want AI to avoid perpetuating norms of domination in education, we have to think about what are the policies, how are they enforced, what are potentially exclusionary norms, and what are the impact of interpersonal experiences in education with kind of as it currently stands, and then with potential incorporation of AI tools. And then, of course, thinking about learning sciences. I have this cognitive dissonance because from a psychometrics perspective, we often assess learning individually. But I think there's a lot of literature from like collaborative learning scholarship that says learning is a very social and collaborative thing. So therefore, what are the roles of AI tools in kind of groups or communities of learners? Briefly, just the things that keep me up at night in terms like challenges AI has to achieving educational equity is kind of homogenization of or assimilation of language and culture. Hopefully by now you've heard of like prompt engineering and how you have to use this alchemy of language to make generative AI tools like ChatGPT or DALL-E like spit out the outputs we want. I'm currently investigating what is that effect of using these kind of this fun, odd language for people, for example, that speak non-dominant sociolects. So I collaborate with a lot with predominantly Hispanic, Pacific Islander, and Black communities. So what does that mean when they're speaking a different sociolect and engaging with these tools? Another thing is just bad AI behavior, and how do we engage with that and connect that with our pedagogical practices? Because AI will, like always, I think, like perform in unexpected and funny ways. So therefore, how do we prepare and engage with that within our practices? And then finally, just seeing stereotypes. I think biases with new AI tools are at one way to interpret it is becoming more and more subtle. So therefore, how do we engage with those kind of those stereotypes in kind of AI outputs? I think the main takeaway for me is that like AI tools, or like any tools, are going to reshape what knowledge we value. So we have to think about how do we ensure that this doesn't limit we aren't limiting our opportunity or creativity space for the sake of efficiency or automation. So I will go ahead and stop sharing there. I'm really excited for y'all's questions, and I am popcorning over to Kenya.
Yes, hello everybody. Let me share. Find the share button. Okay. All right. Okay, hello everybody. I'm Kenya Andrews, a fourth year PhD student at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I attended Spelman College and Auburn University for undergrad for a double bachelor's. And I think about machine learning justice and human robot interaction, specifically what it looks like to have proper visibility of marginalized people to machines and decision-making algorithms, as well as how we can use algorithmic justice to correct historical injustices and to provide proper access to marginalized people groups. And feel free to scan the QR code to connect and just, get to know me a little bit better and all of those things, see my work a little more closely. So I'm going to talk about like the work I do and just how it kind of influences education and things like that. And I look forward to your questions as well. So the first thing that I think about is like justice and historical bias. So if we're not careful, history just repeats itself, right? And that's how machine learning algorithms learn. They learn from the past and then they make decisions on the past. But when we look at marginalized people, the decisions that were made for them weren't good most of the times, right? So we don't want to get in instances where we promote these ideas that are bad. So sorry, this is a little out of order, but I worked with some people here to do a work that looked at intersectionality and testimonial injustice, where testimonial injustice is just where you're unheard. And intersectionality is how different aspects of who you are come together to talk about, how you have power in the world or the lack thereof. And what we found is that we can only see some of those instances of injustice when we look at intersectionality. Oftentimes in machine learning, it's ignored for simplicity's sake and for generalizability. But taking that extra step is the only way that we see some of those instances of injustice. And we also found through this work that some machine learning algorithms that are fair or more fair, they're, or even just the structures that we use to look at them, they're fair in some instances, but not in others, especially when we start looking at subgroups. And for access, I just think about how access can be prohibited to different groups. And this was a work that I did with my advisor, Ms. Bohanesian, where we looked at modeling access differences when we were trying to allocate different resources. We used vaccines as an example, but what we found is that disadvantaged populations have the largest barriers to accessing things. But at the same time, if they don't get those resources, they have the harshest repercussions of not receiving them. And when resources are limited, we just can't distribute equitably because it's not enough. So that's where we focus on instances of justice, where people who need the resources the most get them first and have priority to them. So a big part of my framework in the way I see things and the way that I work things is that we can't just simply give everybody equitable things, but sometimes marginalized people need more and more opportunities to get those things. And we see when we do that, then things downstream are better. So for vaccines, like hospitalization rates and things like that. The next thing I look at a lot is visibility. So how visibility is changed, particularly like for instances of injustice that occur. And in this work, we just looked at testimonial, character, and framing injustice to see how people are hidden. And in particular, we created an education tool for journalists and editors to be able to not only find words that cause injustice, but also to have explainability from other machine learning algorithms that showed them why these words are bad choices and the type of stereotypes that they can promote, as well as some resources on them. And the last work that I am going to talk about today is one where I did that looked at racial representation in academic materials. So we took textbook materials from the field of dermatology and tried to understand the distribution of skin tones within those books. And that awareness helps people to understand if the teaching tools that they're using is going to be proper for talking to marginalized people groups in particular. And we just, in this work, automated the process because at scale, it's really hard to go through and look through every single textbook that there is to try and understand. And it's really time consuming if you haven't done it before. So yeah, that's some of the work I do and just some context for the things I look at. And I will popcorn to the next person.
Thank you so
And so
much,
Lili,
Kenya.
you're
And
up next.
yeah, thank you so much, Kenya, and also Benji for the wonderful sharing. Let me get it up for screen sharing. Yeah, I'm also truly excited to be part of the community today and share more about myself and my work. So my name is Lili and I come from and grew up in Southeast China. That's the place where I engage with Eastern ways of knowing and its interconnectedness. And through our relationship with the land and waters, the small bridges and stone alley, as well as classic gardens. I'm currently located in Bay Area, California, and work as one of the postdoc fellow in the STEM at PACER program at Michigan State University, which is an NSF-funded postdoc cohort that focuses on advancing STEM education in a community context. I just completed my PhD program this past spring in instruction technology and learning sciences at Utah State University. As a learning sciences researcher, I have been very broadly interested in research at the intersection of cultural learning and technology, particularly in understanding how we can design learning environments to support learning and interaction across the natural, cultural, and technology-supported environments with design-based research and community-based research. So for today, I really want to share about this idea that's really important for my work during the past 5 years. So this idea about learning with technology as cultural and actually as doubly cultural. So first of all, formal learning environments are often assumed to be acultural spaces, but actually are shaped by a set of expectations rooted in a dominant culture. In settler societies such as the United States, researchers use the term settler expectation to describe these often entrenched and usually hidden boundaries that tend to control the borders of acceptable meanings and meaning-making practices. So these assumptions that learning environment are not cultural often results in the othering of minoritized knowledges, practices, and identity, and posing challenge to the design learning environments to be more just, sustainable, and culturally thriving. And at the same time, there's also this prevalent belief that technology is also neutral and acultural. And that the design of technology is all rooted in a particular culture, historical, and political knowledges and values. So this is really important to consider as we become more aware that current forms of emerging technology, for example, AI, actually perpetuate systematic injustice across different settings. So it's kind of inevitable that the design of technology always supports certain ways of knowing, being, and relating. So this really got me to think how we can make culture visible in our design of learning with technology. Over the past 5 years, I've been working on this project called Cultivate Connections, and in which we intend to make the Western culture visible in formal learning environments. And the key aim of the project is to cultivate connection across partners, culture, and disciplines. So we developed a research practice partnership between experiential learning school, tribal knowledge holders, and multicultural research teams from the LED Lab and Tohi Lab from the Utah State University, with a shared goal to design and implement culturally centered curricular units for sixth grade classrooms. So for our partnership really allow us to reimagine learning technology in a culturally centered learning environment we're trying to develop as a team. For example, in the 2021 to 2020 school year is another design cycle for our team, and we particularly look at how these technology from like students iPad-based technology ecosystem in the classroom, how we can repurpose this in the broader culturally centered learning environment, and how we center culture in the use of technology to support their digital storytelling, their making of podcasts, and design of AR experiences. So from this process over school year, something really interesting that we see is we are able to use technology to decide static relationship in the classroom, particularly use relationship with culture. And we also identify their tensions in the learning and design with technology during the process of expanding relationship with culture. For example, we found some students find it challenging to share their cultural experiences and cultural knowledge, which is restricted by some of the default made available by the technology that we often assume as acultural. So these experiences really make me think about this big idea of futurity as we're talking about equity in higher education today. So when we think about AI, it's really important to think about whose future we are centering when using this new technology and what kind of future we're supporting students to imagine for themselves as they are using AI. So it's really important to consider who designs AI and for whom AI is, and what forms of knowing, relating, and being can be made possible with future AI. I want to end my sharing with a fun response I got from ChatGPT quite a while ago, but it feels like both fun and profound to think about in the context we have right now. So it says, I don't have personal preferences as I'm just a computer program. All right, thank you so much, and I look forward to more conversation.
All right, I think I'm next here, so I'll share my screen. All right, is that showing the slides?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Jaemarie Solyst, and I'm super excited to be here today. I'm a final stage PhD student in the Human Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. So I'm currently calling in here from Pittsburgh. Let me progress my slides. My work is broadly at the intersection of human-computer interaction, learning science, and responsible AI, and I am a mixed methods researcher, and so I take also a design-based research approach. And I'm really interested in positioning marginalized youth as techno-social change agents, an idea that comes from culture-responsive computing. And so in other words, kind of like young people who have agency to advocate for justice and change dominant narratives in an increasingly AI-driven society. Marginalized youth are greatly impacted by AI technology, but have some of the least say in it, and they're not recognized as important contributors to responsible AI. So in my research, I'll share two small findings from different papers. I'm looking at different aspects of how marginalized youth can have agency with AI. First is through culture responsive AI literacy. And I mean, not just kind of technical aspects, but an emphasis on socio-technical and ethical components as well. For example, I looked at how youth, specifically Black middle school girls, could be supported in AI literacy with design thinking. So focusing on critical thought about the design of current and future AI-driven technologies. And in the study, my team and I saw opportunity for critical consciousness to bolster AI literacy. Critical consciousness refers to the ability to recognize and critique systems of oppression, as well as take action against oppressive systems. And so critical consciousness does not come automatically, but it can be cultivated through reflection and analysis. AI literacy could help foster critical consciousness in the context of AI. Additionally, many programs really emphasize programming for computing literacy, which is important, but equally as important may be positioning learners and encouraging them to consider design and leadership positions as a pathway toward change-making as well. The second way I'm looking into supporting youth agency is through engagement opportunities, such as the ability to engage in the design and upkeep of real-world deployed AI beyond dedicated educational settings, including in the context of AI-driven technology that may not be youth-specific, but still impacts them. Youth are regularly using technology that wasn't necessarily designed for children, and many responsible AI approaches have only been studied with adults so far. So in another recent study, I looked at how diverse youth as stakeholders could identify and potentially mitigate algorithmic bias in AI-driven technology that they regularly use. And I found that children 11 years and older could identify bias in common AI that children often use, such as Google search or image results and text-to-image generative AI. And so I saw that participants could often articulate in great detail and clarity when they recognize bias. So an example to just really illustrate this is from a middle school student who noticed bias in this Google image search for the term wedding, noting that there was a real lack of representation. And so they pointed out that there's only young people, only white people marrying white people, and Black people marrying Black people. And there's also no gay or lesbian marriages. So children here are really insightful. And so ultimately, the study found that youth have critical insight about bias. They can be supported by those around them for more sense-making. And we also observed that they have skills and knowledge to engage in activities about AI fairness that have so far only been explored with adults. And so I really aim to kind of set the foundation to focus on not if, but how can diverse youth as stakeholders have opportunities to be a part of what fairness looks like in AI? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for the future to really explore this further. So I'll next pass it over to Francisco.
All right, can you all see my screen? Perfect. All right. Thanks, Jaemarie. So hi, everyone. I'm Francisco Castro, and I'm calling in from the U.S. East Coast. I'm an AI and Ethics Research Fellow at New York University through the Computing Innovation Fellows Program of the Computing Research Association and the U.S. National Science Foundation. And I'm not sure if it's freezing up on your end, but on the image on the right of this slide, you can see me testing out one of our wearable projects in our lab at NYU, which is always a really fun project. I also co-founded the Papaya Project, which is a multi-institutional initiative for the critical and equitable practice of computing education and research. And before NYU, I researched computing education and wearable technologies for STEM education at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the Worcester Polytechnic Institute, where I also got my PhD. And before that, I also briefly worked on accessible speech recognition technologies at the Nara Institute of Science and Technology. And that would be in Japan. So I draw from several research disciplines and practices for my work, which also influences a lot of my perspectives on emerging technologies and AI for educational equity. And the disciplines that I'll be talking about intersect with each other in many ways. And one of the disciplines I draw from is the learning sciences, particularly from the making community. And a lot of my work explores how to create spaces and environments that enable joyful and collaborative learning. So I often interrogate the ways that technologies and AI can be leveraged to enhance the experience of joyful making and how it can also support the social aspects of learning. I also draw from HCI, or human-computer interaction research, which it seems like a lot of us do. In particular, when I draw from HCI when thinking about how we can center the knowledge and practices of the communities that we work with, especially as we engage with AI that impacts a lot of different communities. And the pictures on this slide are from two of the community organizations that I closely work with. The one on the left is STEM from Dance, which is an organization in New York City that focuses on empowering young women to engage in STEM disciplines through dance and dance performances. And the other one on the right is the Community Word Project, where we work with teaching artists to engage students in combining various artistic disciplines like poetry and visual art with computing. I also focus on critical theories and social justice within my work. And here I ask questions around what and whose values are privileged and embedded within the technologies, learning designs, and AI models that we create, and interrogating who gets included or excluded as we embed these values, principles, and motivations within our work. The pictures on this slide were taken from the final performance dance video of students that we worked with back in 2021. And the dance video was about women empowerment, where they critiqued society's harmful treatment of women through an interactive dance performance. And lastly, I also engaged computing and AI education communities, particularly around questions on how we can empower learners through AI and computing, while also thinking about meaningful ways to teach learners to be critical of the technologies that they are learning and using, such as thinking about how they make sense of the data that they are consuming, as well as the data that they are producing themselves and submitting to different tech systems. And just to wrap up, one example from my work that exemplifies the perspectives that I talked about on the various research disciplines I draw from when thinking about technologies, AI, and educational equity is my work on using creative computing and AI to empower learners. And within this work, my team and I think critically about how we can authentically engage learners' identities and cultural and community knowledge as they build, as they explore and critique various computing and AI systems and models, as well as how we can leverage their creative practices and experiences with AI to facilitate their own reflections and critiques of AI within their own communities or even society more broadly. So in this slide, I put in a picture of a creative computing tool that we use with learners to create interactive and artistic performances, such as the picture in the bottom, with the digital flames moving with the dancer. I hope it's showing over on your side. So we also use this environment to also engage learners in thinking about how the designs and biases of AI may include or exclude certain communities and the kinds of assumptions about people that are embedded in data and AI models. So I'm going to stop right there.
All right, well, thanks very much to all of our speakers. And so now I'll ask a few questions, and then I encourage the audience as we go to post questions in Whova or in the chat here, and we'll take questions from all of you in 15 minutes or so. And so the first question that I have is, what are some dimensions related to equity that current AI technologies do not adequately consider when designed for and used in educational settings? And anyone can jump in.
This is Benji. I will just start by kind of having Erica Epler who dropped a great question on Huba and kind of building off their answer because just like just we don't really know much about impacts on AI and related to accessibility. And I think about accessibility as relating to like physical, mental, and emotional accessibilities. There's a lot of that goes into making a course accessible beyond what your kind of disabilities and accommodations office at higher education institutions may support. There's a whole lot of hidden disabilities and a whole lot of students that don't feel comfortable disclosing disabilities. So as we think about engaging with AI tools, there isn't that much, at least from the research space, in regards to how we should think about, especially these newer generative AI tools and accessibility.
I'll also add that the paper I talked about was on intersectionality and voices being hidden in intersectionality. And that's a huge thing that people just completely ignore, oftentimes because it makes things hard and it makes things tough. But really, and also because people are increasingly more afraid to say that certain attributes are more important than others. So for example, like in some instances, race is more important than gender, or, you know, a lot of other situations like that. So they're also kind of afraid to go through the validation process of seeing, like, you know, the intensity to which these things matter. So intersectionality is often one of those attributes that's not designed for or and not looked at.
I love both of these answers to this question. I'd love to add on also, I think there's a lot of opportunity to have critical conversations with family members as well. In educational settings, a lot of the time, learners are just in a classroom or on their own learning. But with all these new innovations, I think it would be great to bring in parents or other guardians for support, and also offer ways to support those adults in learning about AI themselves. Often there's an assumption that parental or guardian figures will help mediate that relationship to technology, or that they know more about technology than the youth involved, but that's not always the case. So opportunities to kind of help both youth and adults learn together, I think, is an opportunity there.
Something I'm also considering is about like the kind of knowledge that's being represented and privileged, especially with AI. I was actually in both this conference and also the conference about doing indigenous research at the same time today. So I think a lot about the kind of knowledge we are like centering. For example, ChatGPT is a lot about like text-based interaction, but their knowledge that's also oral. So there's a lack of representation and ways to center something like that. So I want to add a little bit about that for this question. Yeah.
And just to kind of wrap up, since everyone's kind of mentioned really good answers to this question, but like, I think there's also value in thinking about the kinds of interfaces that we're developing within and around these AI technologies. Like, you know, take, for example, ChatGPT. For a lot of people who are, you know, technologists and professionals, we all recognize that there's a lot of quote unquote thinking that goes behind the interface of ChatGPT. But like for a lot of people, the way these systems are designed kind of echoes a form of like powerful ways of communicating knowledge. It seems almost human-like, and you know, a lot of people will attribute trust onto those systems. So like, how do we mediate the kinds of trust that we're eliciting from people? Because that interacts with a lot of the kinds of interaction that fosters the kinds of interactions that may or may not be harmful to different communities, especially depending on their needs.
And I'll just quickly unmute and add someone asked me to explain what is intersectionality. And intersectionality is how the different parts of who you are come together to talk about the power that you have in the world and how the world perceives you. So for example, your race, your religious status, your income level, things like that are affected by, it's basically all the attributes of who you are, whether you are aware of them or not, come together to show up as if you have power or not in the world. And I'll quickly add too, sorry, last thing. Last thing. I think one of the things that we also just don't really design well for is neurodivergence, because which is like how people are not typical in their neurological paths, or have different types of ways of understanding things. Some people need kinetic things as well versus just like sitting and reading, or there's not only text, there's also oral, things like that. So yeah, that's one more thing.
Yeah, so many great answers. Designing for accessibility, designing for neurodivergent learners, people with intersectional identities, thinking about people's whole learning communities and how we're privileging certain ways of knowing and what they're learning, but also how we're designing the interactions. I feel like that's a whole vision for how we might be able to design better AI technologies in the future. The next question we have for you are, what are some of the best practices you found in carrying out community-based research?
I hate to jump in again first. I'll start us off. One of the things that I found really effective is having word walls. So when you sit down with people in your community that you're designing for, call them in for a meeting, but put up like a section for goals and a section for hopes and a section for desires. And just put up words that describe each of the things that you're looking for. So a lot of times people don't exactly know what they need, but they know, how they feel when they see something. So maybe you have a section for feelings, maybe you have a section for, some people do know, like, we need traffic control in our community, or we need more books, we need better books, we need more money. So just having like some word walls and things so everybody in the room can see it. And so everybody can kind of touch and like, be a share together. It's been helpful.
And I can kind of say more about that. So kind of, I think at a high level, like in terms of a process of theoretical approach, like in community-centered research, I draw upon, again, like Sasha Costanza-Chock's Design Justice, again, like long-term mutually beneficial partnerships, and then William Penuel on like kind of conceptualizing research practice partnerships as joint work boundaries. So I think of like community-centered research as like, how do we kind of work across institutional and cultural boundaries? I think challenges are just like, there's the classic notions of like, how do you establish trust when you're an outsider, especially when you're working with under-resourced or minoritized communities? I think like the things that we should not do, or we should avoid, what is the savior complex of like, yes, I am as a researcher at like well-educated researcher at like well-funded institution, like I'm just gonna swoop in and fix these problems that I really don't know much about, respectfully. And then also just avoid, lack of a better term, just inspiration porn, where I'm just gonna kind of swoop in, do the research, get some pictures with some black and brown kids, and then just head on out and never be seen again. right? So it's how do we establish trust? How do we establish a mutually beneficial relationship? What mutually beneficial is sometimes, perhaps as a researcher or educator, you're trying to develop like publish papers or develop a service learning course or something like that, but also embedded in your research is thinking about like what is a meaningful contribution and knowledge sharing with the community. So it has me going to community meetings and presenting with community meetings. I partner with the community-based organizations there for a whole slew of reasons. And then finally, it's a money thing. How do you compensate participants for their time, which is really tough. I had to jump through a bunch of hurdles to figure out how I can pay undocumented youth for kind of like long-term participation. Happy to talk about that in non-recorded sessions. But yeah, it's trust. It's some long-term mutually beneficial relationships, and it's making sure that your research or your teaching is not the only thing that benefits.
Definitely, I want to echo some of that sentiment and say like that relationship building is really important, and even finding times to connect that are, of course, beyond the research. If, for example, I work with some schools, if there's opportunities to just get to know the families and kind of understand their values, that can help the research, but also it's just great to connect with the communities for that mutually beneficial aspect. I think there's also kind of like a shared power aspect in terms of driving the research questions that are driven by the community's actual wants. For example, one of the schools I worked with, they really did want the families and parents to be involved. So I pivoted some of my work to focus on that family aspect, which was really generative overall. And I'm really thankful that they wanted that. It was really beneficial that we were able also to create family-focused curriculums to meet their needs as well.
Just to kind of just to add to what's already been said, one of the best things that have worked for me is actually being truthful to the needs that we are addressing within our work and the shortcomings of your own positionality relative to the research that we're doing. And by being truthful to these, you don't just highlight possible pathways for addressing open questions, but also deeply embed the communities you work with as co-designers and co-creators within your work. Sometimes the questions you're asking aren't the right questions for the communities you're partnering with. And they know the questions that need to be asked for their own spaces and communities. And it also challenges a lot of your own assumptions and helps sustain relationships with these communities. And a lot of people I've already mentioned relationship building. And this is really a critical part of community-based or community-engaged research. And, you know, sometimes you have to fight against existing systems and bureaucracies to ensure the safety and continued empowerment of the communities and partners that you work with.
Yeah, I think a lot of these big ideas and values really resonate with me. Something I can add is I think the 4R principles doing research with Indigenous community, which is relationality, responsibility, respect, and reciprocity, has actually really helped me to think about any partnership working with different communities. And especially in the context of thinking about doing research about technology, I think it's pretty subtle that sometimes we are not aware that we are bringing this deficit model and in the way we approach community and in the way we talk about research. Like I remember there's another project I've been doing for a long time, almost at the same, meanwhile with the project I shared at the beginning, we start with working with the tribal nation, but we start the research, but really think about what technology means together. So we are building a definition of technology. I really value that each community have their original technology. So we are not the people bringing the technology. And also I think it's really important to rethink the word benefits in the context of research. Usually we will have the assumption that doing research is for public good. But what counts as really a benefit to the community and their priorities is also really important to consider.
Thanks everyone for your really thoughtful responses. So I'll ask one more question, then we'll turn it over to the audience. So the last question is, in what ways does generative AI present opportunities or challenges in design for educational equity?
I'm not trying to say there's a prescribed order, but just to fill the void here. I think opportunities, and this is kind of like the on the top. I love like 4 or number plus letter framework. So here's the 3D framework of dreaming, drudgery, and design. So like generative AI can help with dreaming or kind of like ideation or kind of creative thinking. Maybe it helps you go from 0 to 1 if you're stuck. It helps with drudgery, right? So it can help with kind of like automating or reducing your kind of like kind of mundane tasks, and they can also help with design, like building content. Um, I think the key challenge is like it's kind of like an expert is someone who knows exactly what not to be wrong about, right? So like you all as instructional designers, instructors, professors, et cetera, know what can't go, what's so important that it absolutely cannot go wrong in a class or something, for example. Don't expect like any like generative AI tool to know that, right? Um, yeah, so I think that's certainly the harm. And then kind of going back to what I was talking about in the beginning about like the thing that keeps me up at night is this reduction of language, right? So I work with high school students. Emojis reflect how they feel about things at times, which is I guess great and it's informative, but I always think about like what are those emotions between that emojis don't reflect. Similarly, it's just like kind of generative AI. There's a special language for prompt engineering. It outputs things that reflect kind of certain dominant societal norms. So what are we losing in the creativity of or kind of or of and culture of students by using these tools? So
One of the challenges for us as like fair machine learning people is that these generative models are really big and they require a lot of data. And a lot of times we don't exactly know what it's picking up, like what patterns it's picking up. And that's called a black box model, if you ever heard that term before, and we don't have any explainability or insight into what exactly is happening. And that's kind of that can be kind of scary and dangerous, particularly in education settings, because you're informing somebody about something without having that idea about why. So one of the ways that my research addressed this is like with that the tool I talked about earlier, where we were educating journalists and things, where we used another AI model that wasn't black box to generate some responses that brought up stereotypes that potential works were promoting, or that potential sentences from LSTM models, which are large language models, basically, like ChatGPT, for example. Um, like just explaining why some of the word choices in there are not great. That explainability is really important just for training things in the future, and also like to be able to present it to the person who's reading it to understand why they came up with the answer that they came up with. And it can really be nice in the classroom to help with reasoning and logic-based thinking, just to give students maybe different ideas about, why certain things, are said and maybe why they're not said. So.
Yeah, so a related question that was posted in Whova was basically what happens when in classroom environments, faculty decide to restrict students' access to generative AI and what problems are caused by that. So I wonder if you would want to speak to that too in their answers.
Y'all make me talk again. Okay. I've been in conversations with faculty at Stanford CS department in particular. Again, just about like how to address this. Unsurprisingly, like concerns of plagiarism or cheating or something like that are certainly top of mind. Um, I think in terms of like when I think oftentimes faculty members, they have agency to make decisions about their class. Um, I think like trying to detect cheating or something like that is probably a losing game. I say that because OpenAI tried to detect generated text, and I think they've since dropped the project since they couldn't do it well. Um, and OpenAI makes like ChatGPT and DALL-E. So I think there could be inconsistencies in experiences. In the like one faculty member one term decides to ban or not allow tools, faculty member a different term seem to allow it. So I think more consistent, probably a higher up policy level, whether like department wide or university wide or something like that, can help kind of prevent like whiplash of like, oh, it's banned, now it's not, now or something like that. And then also just thinking about like what's a long-term strategy for this under the assumption that students might engage with it, perhaps in asymmetric ways. It's people in different positions will use the same technology in different ways. So I think trying to explicitly define a policy and hopefully be able to stick to that policy to prevent kind of like whiplash for both faculty as well as students can be helpful. And I think it goes back to how do you position like these tools. So I think for a lot of CS classes, it's at Stanford, it's been like ChatGPT or Copilot for code has to be cited as like a thing that like as another person that students consulted. And then also I think all exams are now like largely moved back to like pen and paper. So
And I think it's more complex than think about this as like a black and white situation, like ban or not ban. Um, Especially think about like, I think what I've been shared about like both learning environment, technology or cultural. So it's possible to cultivate a learning environment that actually decenter AI, but still being able to support students to their needs. So as a lived example, I was international students and English is my second language. I do see a lot of moments where I do feel helpful to have ChatGPT and be able to more freely express myself in classroom space and also online learning spaces. So I think it's important to embrace like AI literacy, but also important to cultivate an environment that embrace that new literacy needs more critically.
And just to kind of like connect to what Lili just said, I work with a lot of learners within artistic spaces. And one of the challenges that have been repeatedly communicated by the communities I work with is loss in terms of not only opportunities to be their own creative engines, but also their own cultural practices, their own identities within their practices, especially as a lot of these are codified into models without community approval, right? And these eventually become co-opted by these systems. And these ties into our conversations earlier about how we should engage communities in our research and how we can prioritize their needs as opposed to capitalistic gains.
So we have time for one quick question from the audience, if anybody wants to ask another question.
I guess while people are thinking, I'll just add that I guess the fear in like having the generative models is over reliance and like just not using that muscle of logic-based thinking. But a good way, that you can have it is having, teaching students how to how these models are developed because they're developed based off of logic. So maybe even going through paper-based like rules of how like these models work and like we actually do, even though, and there's a way like to do it at every grade level, right? Like you don't have to pull up a LSTM model and, figure out how to feed words into it, but just, based on each grade level, figuring out like a nice way to do the logic-based thinking too with the model.
Do any of the panelists have any other closing thoughts based on what we talked about today?
Yeah, I will totally ask the panelist question. You can respond to one or two of them. So say like in 5 years, say we did a really great job with AI and educational equity, and what does that future in 5 years look like? Or if you want to be a little more pessimistic, say we did not do a great job addressing educational equity with AI. So therefore, what does that future look like in 5 years?
I'll quickly start us and wrap this up. I think if we don't slow down with adopting these tools, then it's not going to go well. We just literally need to slow down and take more time to get more just things. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I want to second that. Time really is important here, and slowing down, especially relating back to how to have sustainable research partners. I think a lot of tech is like rush things, break things, disrupt things, and that causes algorithmic harm and bias in big and scalable ways. And so if we can slow that down, really integrate our community partners in understanding AI and their values and how to better support community culture and center different groups in the creation of AI, I think that will really help.
Yes, what I'd like to add is not only slowing things down, but also highlighting parts of it that are actually very beneficial, especially to marginalized communities. Like those tend to be ignored in favor of the ones that favor, like, often the greater public, which isn't necessarily always the safest route. Especially if, in favor of the general public, we're actually like harming a lot of the more minoritized and marginalized communities that we work with. So being very meaningful and intentional with which communities you're thinking about, and I had mentioned this earlier about like what kinds or who gets privileged or included or excluded within the systems and models that we're designing.
Sounds like
think time.
Go ahead. One last thought.
Yeah, sorry, just real quick. I think time is just really helpful dimension to think about technology as both cultural and historical. I think Kenya shared about this historicity perspective and think about technology. Yeah, just that.
Well, these are great thoughts to end on. So let's all thank our panelists for such an engaging and enlightening panel. And thanks everybody for attending, and definitely feel free to follow up with us if you want to continue this conversation.